Hello, my dear students. Today we have a History and Civilization course. We have 20th century basic subjects like the Labour Party in Britain and the rights of women in Britain in 20th century. At the start of the 20th century, Britain was still the greatest world power. By the middle of the century, although still one of the big three, Britain was clearly weaker than either the United States or the Soviet Union. By the end of the 70s, Britain was no longer a world power at all, and was not even among the richest European powers. Its power had ended as quickly as Spain's had done in the 17th century. The rise of the Labour Party. An important political development during the war was the rapid growth of the Labour Party. Although it was formally established in 1900, its beginnings dated from 1873 as part of the trade union movement. The trade unions themselves had grown enormously from 2 million members to 5 million by 1914 and 8 millions by 1918. In that year, for the first time, all men aged 21 and some women over 30 were allowed to vote, and the number of the voters doubled from 8 to 16 million people, most of whom belonged to the working class. As a result of these changes, the Labour Party, which had won 29 seats in 1906 election, won 57 seats in 1918, and 142 seats in 1922, and 191 seats in 1930. The following year, the first Labour Party was created. The Labour Party, however, was not socialist. Its leaders were or had become members of the middle classes. Instead of social revolution, they wanted to develop a kind of socialism that would fit the situation in Britain. This was partly because Labour leaders did not wish to frighten the voters. It was also because the middle class thinkers before the war had almost completely failed to interest the working class in social ideas or socialist ideas. By 1914, the socialist Peter Webb could write, "The landslide in England towards social democracy proceeds steadily, but it is the whole nation that is sliding, not one class of manual workers." That slide has continued for most of the century. As a result, the effect of Britain on Britain in the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was not as great as many feared it would be. Enough people were interested in Marxism to establish a communist party, but the Labour Party firmly refused to be connected with it. However, Marxism stirred a deep-seated fear in the Conservative Party, which has continued to see evidence of Marxist socialism behind the Labour Party, the trade unions, and strike action. As a result of the Labour's success in 1914, the Liberal Party almost completely disappeared. Liberals, which traditional capitalist ideas on the economy, joined the Conservative Party, while most liberal reformers joined the Labour Party. We turn to the next and the second topic, the rights of women. In 1918, some women over the age of 30 gained the right to vote after a long, hard struggle. John Stuart Mill, a radical thinker, had tried unsuccessfully to include votes for women in the 1867 Reform Bill. The Industrial Revolution had increased the power of men and their feelings about property. Karl Marx noticed that the factor owning Englishman's attitude of chivalry to women had not prevented them or him from forcing women to work like slaves in their factories and workhouses. A man thought of his wife and daughters as his property, and so did the law. It was almost impossible for women to get a divorce, even for those who were rich enough to pay the legal cost. Until 1882, a woman had to give up all her property to her husband when she married him. And until 1891, husbands were still allowed to, by law, to beat their wives with a stick, no thicker than a man's thumb, and to lock them up in a room if they wished. By 1850, wife beating had become a serious social problem in Britain. Many lower classes were able to take sexual advantage of working women. Women were probably treated worse in Britain than in any other industrializing European country at this time. After 1870, the situation, particularly for middle classes women, began to improve. Women were allowed to vote and to be elected to borough and county council. A very small number started to study at Oxford and Cambridge in separate women's colleges. But while they were allowed to follow the same course of study as men, they could not receive a degree at the end. Middle class women became increasingly determined to have equal rights. The liberation of women took other forms. They started to wear lighter clothing, shorter hair and skirts, began to smoke and drink openly, and to wear cosmetics. Married women wanted smaller families, and became easier. Divorce became easier, rising from a yearly average of 800 in 1910 to 8,000 in 1939. Undoubtedly, many men also moved away from Victorian values. Leading writers like D.H. Lawrence, Aldous Huxley, James Joyce, and Virginia Woolf freely discussed sexual and other sensitive matters which would have been impossible for earlier generations. Once women could vote, many people felt that they had gained full and equal rights. But there was still a long battle ahead for equal treatment and respect both at work and at home. The struggle for full women's rights is one of the most important events in recent British history, social history, and its effects continue to be felt. Right. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.